I didn't think to check. How's my hair? Is my part like all weird, or is it okay?
No, it looks pretty good. How's mine?
Yours is great. I don't
Okay.
see a part. It's just
Just
gel
everywhere.
Yeah. Welcome back, everybody, to the Balance for Life podcast, where our goal is to help you uncover the secrets of happiness and success and implement them as well.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Change it up a little bit.
Yeah. So make sure you join our social pages. We are all over social media. Sometimes we're active. Other times we're not so much.
Yeah.
But we try and get you some information, and we're going to try and do better as well. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all at Balance for Life, number 4. And then we are on Twitter as well, but we're far less active on Twitter.
Yes.
But at Adam and Perry.
It's called
Twitter.
X now, right?
Oh, yes. We are on X. I'm sorry. Sorry, Elon.
Okay, yes.
And then for those of you that are watching this, we are on YouTube. And for those of you that are not watching this, we are on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you go check us out on YouTube or listen to us anywhere that you hear podcasts.
Yeah. We have a cool-looking cactus as our centerpiece.
Yes, we do. It's an aloe plant.
Yep. And every week you will notice that Adam has an energy drink, and I have water or
Some
chamomile tea or something, and a Batman mug.
Sometimes it may be a different energy drink. This week it is Bubblicious Cotton Candy Ghost. It's a
Ooh.
fairly new variety.
That sounds good.
Yes, I did try today a newer one. It's Straw Bango Margarita Ghost, and it's delicious. So I am not sponsored by Ghost yet. Hint, hint. But
We should start doing fake commercials. That's not an original idea. I got that from somebody else. They'd be like, "This week's episode is brought to you by paper clips. Paper clips are great. You can use them on your desk, and you can hold pieces of paper together. Anyway,
I like it.
but my water today tastes very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
this is your episode.
Episode.
This is your episode. I'm gonna let you introduce it.
So this episode, this thought came to me recently. I was having a conversation with my wife, and we were talking about things like choices that we make, and even like I was thinking about addictions a little bit, and I really started thinking about Joe Dispenza's book, Evolve Your Brain. So for those of you that have not read this book, I will put it into the comments, or not the comments, but the
Show notes.
Show notes.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent book. A little bit scientific, so a little bit dry, but amazing concept. It's this book I would recommend to anybody and everybody, and I have recommended it to anybody and everybody. But the idea of Evolve Your Brain talks about the actual quantum physics of changing your mind.
Mm.
And so the idea came to me. We were talking about, I can't even remember what it was, some choice that we were in the process of, and we were talking about the thoughts that we have and habits that we have. And so I really wanted to get into this concept of, number one, how does this process of changing your mind actually work? And then I do have an analogy for even breaking habits and addictions. And so I really wanted to kind of break that down a little bit. So to start out with, the idea that he has in this book is talking about the neuroscience of thoughts. And so when you have a thought, the idea is that we have this electrical impulse that goes across a synapse in your brain, right? And we have millions.
You gotta myelinate those synapses, by the way.
Yeah.
I learned that in educational psychology.
Oh,
the myelination of synapses. It's like lubricating them.
Oh, gotcha.
Anyway,
Okay.
I think it has to do with what you're talking about.
I think
probably.
it absolutely does.
Okay, cool,
actually,
cool.
Because
I know something about this.
So we have millions of synapses in our brain, right? There are these neurotransmitters on our nerve cells, and so as these impulses go across these synapses, it creates almost like a trail.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the more you have the same thought, the more clear that trail or that path becomes.
Right, yeah.
And the easier it is for those impulses to take that same path every single time, right?
Yep.
So we get into these habits of thought. right? We get into these habits of thought.
Well, it's like the first time you play a chord on a piano, you have to like, okay, here's C, here's E, here's G, right? You do that over and over again, and eventually, like, you're myelinating those synapses.
Exactly.
Synapses.
See, I knew we were going to bring that in.
There we go.
The other analogy that I had with it is if you think about a trail in the woods, right? If you think about going for a hike in the forest, and this is kind of what sparked my interest with it, is like, okay, I want to go see this waterfall, and so I am going to carve a path first to this waterfall. So I'm gonna start walking this trail, and the more I walk this trail, the more beaten down it becomes, until eventually there's this clearly marked trail in the forest that leads me directly to this waterfall, right?
And eventually you're being teleported from point A to point B.
Yep, basically. And so as we have these thoughts, we're creating these paths of thought in our brain. And it's just, we're going to keep doing that habitually over and over again because that's the clear path and it's the easiest path, right? And so the concept of evolving your brain or changing your mind is this idea of you have to make a conscious effort, right? If I want to say now, instead of going to this waterfall, I want to go to a hot spring or to a meadow, I have to now forge a new path. And I have to create a new path. And so we have all of these different thoughts running through our brain, and the ones that we allow to take hold are the ones that are creating those paths of what's going to happen. And so every time we have a new thought, it's starting to forge that new path, right? And so when we're talking about habits or we're talking about addictions, this is really what kind of got me onto this thought, is talking about addictions. And so we've been going to this swimming hole, right, every day for the last 20 years. Somewhere in the recesses of our brain, we remember this meadow. That's this beautiful sun-kissed meadow with wildflowers and grasses and everything. And we realize at some point that this swimming hole is no longer serving us. Maybe it's got parasites, or maybe there's algae, or maybe there's something dangerous at the swimming hole. But for some reason, we just have this constant trail, and it's the clearest marked path that we get to. And that's basically what an addiction is. It gets to the point where it's no longer a conscious decision that you're making. You're just following the same path that you've always followed. And in order to break that habit, you have to be willing to look and see that, hey, at one point I did have another thought. At one point I did go to a different place. At one point I went somewhere that was far healthier and far more self-serving than where I'm going right now. And take that path that's less traveled.
Yeah. It's really fascinating with addiction too, because everybody is addicted to something. It's just that some addictions are harmful and some are really harmful and some aren't harmful unless it's over. I mean, I would say there's maybe certain addictions that aren't harmful. Yeah. And it's just an addiction. But I think most of them are harmful, right? And we all have harmful addictions that we're working through. And it's really interesting. People talk about triggers, right? When you have a trigger, it's something that you associate with that addiction, and your thoughts automatically go toward that addiction when that trigger happens. So say, for example, you're addicted to alcohol, right? And you're trying to quit and become sober. But like every day on your way home, like you pass a certain bar, or maybe that's where you would stop, right? Yeah. Now when you pass by it, you see that sign and you're like, ooh, and your brain is just automatically goes to that place, right? And it takes training and effort and putting scaffolding in place, like things to train your brain to go somewhere else. Or maybe at first it's taking a different way home.
I was going to say, that's exactly right, because you have to forge a new path. So maybe you have to drive a different way so you don't see that sign every day. You don't see that bar.
And maybe eventually you get to the point where like, okay, I've done all these other things. Now I can drive by it with like just a minimal trigger that I can practice, right? But you might have to take a different way for a while. Or indefinitely sometimes. And that's okay. Like, part of one of the things about the 12-step program is realizing that you don't have control.
Yeah.
And when you let go of that control, that's when you gain the control, right? It's like
Exactly.
you have to surrender to get that control.
Exactly.
And you're trying to just hold on tightly, like that's when, you're white knuckling it.
Yep.
That doesn't work for very long.
Yep. I love that. Just as with our thoughts and these neural pathways and this trail in the woods, the way that we need to create a new path is by making a conscious choice, right? Because like we've established, an addiction or habit is an unconscious, automatic thought, right? It's an automatic response to whatever that trigger is. And so in order to change that, it takes a very conscious effort to make a different choice. And so basically when we take that step, when we make that conscious effort to choose something different, we're essentially forging a new path and finding ourselves in a new destination. And the more we make that choice, the more we're going to be able to change that thought process. And we're going to be able to change that habit.
For sure. I want to talk about some of the different or examples in the pillars.
Yeah. So I think the biggest one, the most recognizable one, is going to be your mental health, right? Because as we're talking about these pathways, essentially the idea came because of these pathways in your brain. So we get into these habits of thought of insecurities and I'm not good enough and I've failed, and we get into these habits of thought, and we talk about, or we hear about a lot of times through coaching and therapy and books and self-help and all of this stuff, we hear about affirmations. And a lot of times I think we kind of blow them off as just this woo-woo thing. But when you actually like physically take that step to look yourself in the mirror and say, I am strong, I am beautiful, I am whatever it is you don't truly think you are. But when you take that step of acknowledging that thought and allowing it to occur, you're actually starting to forge a new path for that thought to take hold. And the more you do that, the more it's going to steer that thought process through a different synapse and allow a new pathway and kind of shut off this negative feeling or this negative thought that you're having and allow it to take a more positive route.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that. One of the things I was thinking about was, how do you apply this to your physical health, to exercising or eating healthy? Now, addiction has a lot to do with your physical health, depending on the addiction. Some more than others, right? Alcohol addiction, drug addiction, smoking, like all of those impact your physical health severely. Yeah. But I was even thinking about like exercising, and I had this thought that it's almost, the more you exercise, create that habit, the easier it becomes. What's interesting about exercising, though, is that depending on your goal, sometimes you have to change it up and create those new pathways just because it became too easy. Yeah. And I think there's this, we have to recognize that our goal is to make it easier, right? Our goal is to make it automatic, our brain, right? But our muscles, on the other hand, I think like if you do 30 minutes of the same exercise every day your whole life, like that's awesome. That's not a bad thing. But if you have a specific goal about getting faster or stronger, sometimes you have to change that up because not only your synapses, but your muscles, just get used to doing the same thing, and you have to change it up to make it more difficult to grow more. Yeah. So sometimes there's even growth in creating these new pathways. Absolutely. And so sometimes creating a new pathway isn't necessarily because the old one is harmful. It's just to have a new one. It's just because it's become too easy. Yeah, exactly. It's you may still enjoy that waterfall, but now the path is so well trodden, it's become too easy, and it's no longer allowing you to grow. It's you've seen it so many times. Now it's just that your body needs something different. Yeah, exactly. And maybe you still go to the waterfalls, but you're adding a new one, right? Yeah. So there's kind of two different things that you can look at. There's, a bad habit that I don't want to do this ever again the rest of my life, kind of a deal, right? You have to create these new pathways to give your place somewhere else to go. Yeah. And then there's also like good pathways that you have, but you know what, this one's too easy. I need to add some other ones, and be a more well-rounded person.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We've talked about addiction from a physical aspect, but we can also talk about addiction from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
And how damaging those addictions can be to your soul and your spiritual health and your family life and everything else, and how harmful it can be to people around you. And so when we talk about those addictions in a spiritual perspective, it's almost a life and death, right? Where you have to make a decision to stop going to that swimming hole that's giving you parasites. And so you have to be able to say, okay, well, yeah, this swimming hole is super pretty and I love to go there and there's really cool cliffs to jump off of, but you know what? It's making me really sick and I am not able to do the other things that I need to do, or it's harming me essentially. And so you have to take a different path.
Well, I think the spiritual aspect of any addiction, even if it's maybe not harming anybody else, is that it takes away to a certain extent your ability to make choices.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of our spirituality is our ability to make choices. And that freedom to choose, that free agency that we have, I believe is something that God gave us and he wants us to use in a positive way.
Absolutely.
And so if we're even an addiction that maybe isn't as harmful, like video games or watching TV or something that may not be harming other people to a certain, and yeah, I mean, you can argue that it's damaging to your physical health, I guess, but
for sure.
But different than smoking or drinking, right?
Yeah.
Or even like an addiction to eating sugar or whatever, right? Or exercising too much, right?
Any kind of addiction.
Any kind of addiction that
a problem
maybe can be a positive thing, but it turns into a negative thing. The damage that it does to your just ability to control yourself.
Yeah.
Right? I think the mental aspect of it is kind of obvious too in some ways. Like your mental health, I think addiction is probably the most damaging thing to your mental health out of anything. I mean, we can talk about other things like lack of confidence, motivation, or whatever, but I think addiction hurts our mental health probably more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so as we create those new pathways and we work on overcoming an addiction, that sense of accomplishment that we get, that sense of relief at feeling like, okay, I'm not totally controlled by this anymore. Even if it's something that you have to fight the rest of your life, you can get to a certain place where it's a lot easier now. Those triggers still come. I still have to deal with them. I still have to like, oh yeah, what was my other pathway? And maybe, it might never be as easy to take that other pathway.
Right.
But the easier you make it, the better. And so I think you can at least get to the point where, hey, maybe it's my second thought, but it's easy to get there.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Anything else about mental health you want to?
No, I think we can jump into financial.
Yeah. One thing I'll say on mental health also,
Yeah.
I think when we're talking about like creating habits and myelinating our synapses and everything, I really like that word, by the way.
It's a good one.
Yeah. It's as with anything, when you create a good habit, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, right?
For sure.
And so, if we're talking about writing in your journal or reading a book or whatever, the more you kind of make yourself do that, then the easier it becomes to continue to work on your mental health. So I think it can be a snowball effect sometimes where the more you do, the more you want to do.
Yeah.
And just taking care of yourself overall feeds into itself.
Absolutely. So, so jumping into financial health, I think that this is another one where there's a lot of things that we could talk about, and addiction is a huge thing with financial health as well. Take, for example, credit cards, right? Like the first time you use a credit card, maybe it's not, maybe you feel a little bit guilty. Maybe, you know that it's going to charge you a whole bunch.
Dave Ramsey talking in your head.
Or you take out a loan and you're like, I don't know if I can really afford that. And that's a really high interest rate. And so you have all these thoughts. But the more you use that credit card, the more you take out those high interest loans, the easier it becomes And nowadays with technology, it's actually super easy. You just put in your name and social security number, and they're like, "Hey, you can get $1,000 tomorrow," but then it's going to cost you 2,000 in the end. And so when we talk about spending with this, it's easy once we start to make those choices. It becomes easier and easier and easier, and then eventually we get to a point where our debt is consuming, and it's basically ruining your entire life. And so, with that one, it takes a conscious effort to say, okay, I need to cut up the credit cards. I need to, get all of these loans paid off so that I'm not paying the interest rates anymore, and make a conscious effort to not even look at that as a possibility anymore.
Definitely. I had a thought, and then it left, like right as I started talking.
It took a new path.
It did. So, but I think there's, if you've listened to any of our other podcasts, you know that we're not saying using credit cards is bad.
Right.
Don't ever do it. For some people, that might be the case.
Yeah.
And that's fine. If you're one of those people, like, don't use credit cards, okay? But for most, or I don't know about most people, for at least half the population probably, based on some studies I've seen, you can use a credit card and you can pay it off on time and you can use it responsibly, and that's great. But, I remember what I was going to say now. We're talking about cutting back and just being more responsible with those decisions. But the other thing that's awesome about finances is the ability to automate your savings.
It's true.
And a lot of the financial gurus I listen to, they talk about pay yourself first. So before you do anything else with your money, or you have that coming automatically out of your paycheck into your 401k, and you get that company match, hopefully. And so if you're paying yourself first because it's automatically happening, like that's a pathway you didn't even really have to build. You just like set it up and it just does it. Yeah. And so that's, I think, even easier in that case, when you can automatically have that going in. Yeah. Is that's money you can't even spend because it's just automatically.
Exactly. So there's pathways with credit cards and spending, and then there's pathways with saving, and even, we talk about offense and defense, right? And starting a new job or starting a new company, starting a new business, whatever. We get into this habit sometimes of, well, I'm my own boss now, right? I've started this business. I can, maybe one day I'm going to make a choice that I'm not going to do the work that I should. I'm going to sit down and watch Netflix instead, or I'm going to do something different. And then over time, that becomes easier and easier. Yeah. And eventually you see your business is failing, and it's because of these choices that you've made. So you have to make a conscious effort to say, okay, no, I need to take a different action today, right? I need to, instead of watching Netflix all day, I need to work on my product, or I need to work on my marketing, or I need to make the phone calls, or I need whatever it is that you need to do. You have to take that action. And sometimes it could even be that you find yourself in a rut of the job that you're in, and it's not serving you anymore, but you just keep doing it day in and day out. And you have to make a conscious decision to take a different choice, to take a different career path, and start that business, or go to the different company, or, whatever that may be. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we can talk about choosing a different path.
Yeah. And even if the answer is to stay with your current job and company, there's still things you can do to create new pathways to take a different path. And maybe it's like I go and I put in the time, but maybe I spend a little too much time on social media instead of working. No one notices, right? And I still have my job or whatever. Right. Eventually that can turn into like, oh, people are noticing now, right? So creating those new pathways of just doing it, right? And I'm not saying don't take like a 5-minute social media break like 2 or 3 times during the day or something, but make sure you're keeping balance.
I like
exactly. So make sure one of the things I would do and I haven't done this as well working from home, but when I worked in an office, I would just go and I would just run up the stairs 4 flights, run back down, and come back to my desk, and like the blood flow helped me just to stepping away from my desk, getting the blood flowing, all of that helped me to get back into work, right? Get
Yeah.
back into making those calls or whatever I was doing.
Yep, for sure. I like that. So the final thought that I have, unless you have anything else, but the final thought that I have is actually goes back to one of our earlier episodes, and it was talking about, I can't even remember where the quote came from, but I just want to leave you with this thought that our thoughts become beliefs,
Mhm.
and beliefs drive you to action. Actions become habits, and then habits eventually become who you are.
Mhm.
And so I've created kind of this mantra for myself of believe, behave, become, right? And it all starts with changing that thought and creating that new thought process. And that can ultimately change who you are as a person.
Mhm.
And it all starts with the direction, the pathway that you're choosing to allow those thoughts to cross.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's funny because one of the episodes we're planning on doing was the almost sounds like the opposite of that, but I don't really think they're contradictory. But it's the you don't think yourself into new ways of acting, you act yourself into new ways of thinking.
Right.
Honestly, I think both of those are true. Like, it's
Yeah.
a cycle; they feed into each other.
Mm-hmm.
The way you think changes how you act. The way you act changes how you think.
Yeah.
So, but that's one of our
Oh, yeah.
episodes we're planning on doing. But it's funny because it sounds like it's the opposite of believe, behave, become. But I don't think it really is.
I think ultimately it's about balance,
Mhm.
and it's a cycle.
Yeah, exactly. It's a cycle for sure.
Yep. So I think that leads us to the challenge for the week, and I think we have an awesome challenge for the week. The challenge is to we talked about affirmations, and so the challenge that I have for you this week is to start saying affirmations, right? Like, if there's something that you don't like, or if there's something that you're insecure about, or if there's something that you feel like could be different in your life, start speaking it and start thinking it and start thinking, creating that new neural pathway to change that negative thought into a positive one.
Yeah, it's a good challenge. I like it. Well, thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah,
Give us a
we appreciate you.
5-star review, a
Yeah.
like.
And don't forget, we will have new episodes coming out on Mondays. We have some exciting ones coming up. We have guests.
We're gonna have guests.
Yeah,
soon.
we're gonna have
We've
guests
been working
soon.
on it. And I think we're gonna actually do it.
I think so.
So yeah, and then if you're, watching on YouTube and you want to just listen on your drive or whatever, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, Google, wherever you can listen to podcasts. We should be there.
Yep.
And then next week, I think we're doing the episode with guests next week, right? Just one
yeah.
guest, or do
We have one for sure,
maybe a second one.
possibly a second one.
But it's going to be really an episode I've been wanting to do for a while, and it's basically it's about how it is okay to cry, even if you're a man.
Yeah,
men can cry. That's what we're going to call it.
Yeah,
it's okay for men to cry.
I agree with that. I think that's an awesome. I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
one.
Me too. I've cried a lot, and look at me, I'm totally fine. Actually, I cry in movies sometimes.
Yeah.
And it depends on the movie. Like, I will admit some of the movies I cry in, and I will not admit some of the others. No, but
that's probably something I would not admit in public.
Hey, when Frodo tells Sam to go home, the first time I saw that, oh my gosh. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you for listening, everyone. We are excited for our next episode.
Yep. We'll see you later.
Bye.